They called me to the 35th floor without explanation, though the air already carried the weight of something final. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and cold ambition. Victor Hallberg sat at the head of the table, his hands folded like a judge who had already written the verdict. He didn't bother with preamble. After 15 years. You're done. Pack your desk. The words landed with surgical precision, cutting through whatever fragments of loyalty I still held. Around the table, colleagues shifted in their chairs, eyes glued to notepads, screens, anything but my face. I had built campaigns with them, stayed late through storms, carried their deadlines on my shoulders, and now not one could meet my gaze. I forced my breathing steady. I would not give Victor the satisfaction of a tremor. I respect your decision, I said evenly. My voice sounded distant, almost rehearsed. Perhaps because it was. Victor smirked. Certain he had closed the chapter of my career with a single line. He didn't notice the way my hand lingered on my bag, nor could he imagine what it carried. Beneath the leather flap rested a signed letter from Sterling Dynamics, our largest client. Written days earlier. Where you go, we follow. I let the silence stretch, then gathered my things. No outburst, no begging, no tears. Just the faintest smile tugging at my lips as I turned toward the door. To Victor, it must have looked like resignation. To me, it was the curve of inevitability. The glass doors whispered shut behind me. My heels clicked across the marble hallway, each step echoing like a countdown. 15 years of my life had been dismissed in 30 seconds, yet I felt lighter than I had in months. Victor believed he had ended me. What he didn't know was that the real game had just begun, and I already held the first domino in my hand. I pressed the elevator button, the numbers descending. When the doors opened, I stepped inside, carrying both a cardboard box of memories and the quiet assurance that the story wasn't over, it was only beginning. My office looked smaller, with the blinds half drawn and the desk stripped of its usual clutter. I opened drawers and pulled out the pieces of my life I had hidden there, a photograph of my daughter at her high school recital, a program from my father's funeral. I missed because Victor had insisted I stay for a last-minute client call, and a stack of thank you notes from colleagues who no longer looked me in the eye. I placed each relic into the cardboard box, careful as though they were fragile. Around me, the younger analysts lingered in doorways, whispering. Some lowered their heads in pity, while others typed furiously on their phones, no doubt sending Victor updates on how fast I was packing. 15 years of service reduced to a spectacle for gossip. As I reached for the last framed photo, a candid of me laughing with my team. Years ago, I caught the reflection of two assistants watching. Their voices carried just enough to reach me. She was dead weight anyway. I didn't turn. My hands stayed steady, but my chest tightened with the old familiar ache. I had heard those words in different forms my entire life, from professors, from rivals, from people who thought quiet meant weak. Each time I proved them wrong, but the scar never faded. I balanced the box on my hip and walked through the corridor. People parted like I carried something contagious. No one stopped me. No one said thank you. Just silence and screens. Halfway to the elevator, my phone buzzed. I shifted the box and unlocked it. An encrypted message appeared from an anonymous account. We should talk. I know what Hallberg did with your proposal. I froze for a breath, pulse quickening. The box felt lighter than the weight suddenly pressing on my chest. I slid the phone back into my bag, the message repeating in my mind as I pushed through the lobby doors. The city air hit me sharp and cool, and I knew this wasn't an ending. Something was waiting, and I was walking straight toward it. The message directed me to a narrow cafe on Fifth Avenue, the kind with chipped tables and coffee that smelled stronger than the walls could contain. I chose a seat by the window, my box of belongings at my feet, and waited. Minutes later, a woman slid into the chair across from me. She looked older than I remembered, though I wasn't sure I had ever truly known her. "Elena Kraus," she said quietly. The name came back in fragments. Financial analyst, Sharp. Left suddenly a year ago. She set a folder on the table. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Hallberg built his promotion on theft your work. Isabel, this is the proof. I pulled the folder closer. Inside were drafts of my strategy presentation, the one I had spent months perfecting. Notes in my handwriting, dates, timestamps. Attached emails where Victor forwarded my files to himself, stripping my name from the documents before presenting them as his own. The pages trembled in my hands, not from the weight of the evidence, but from the fury it ignited. My late nights, the missed milestones with my daughter, the trust I gave him, all repackaged as his ladder to power. Elena leaned forward. He promised me a promotion if I kept quiet. Instead, he buried me. I thought you should know. Vindication surged through me, but it was laced with bitterness. I had given 15 years to a man who saw me as disposable the moment I was no longer useful. Yet here, finally, was something he couldn't erase proof. I closed the folder and looked out at the busy street. Pedestrians passed, oblivious to the storm gathering inside me. Clients already stood behind me, and now I had documents that could rip the foundation out from under him. I slipped the folder into my bag, my voice calm but steady. "Thank you, Elena. You've given me more than proof, you've given me timing." As I left the cafe, the folder pressed against my side, and for the first time that day, I felt the fire of choice burning clear to strike immediately, or to wait until the collapse would be absolute. By the time I reached Midtown, the story of my firing was already running laps around New York's corporate circuit. I could feel it in the buzz of notifications on my phone calls from colleagues I ignored, emails from reporters left unopened, whispers that traveled faster than any press release Victor could craft. At Bryant Park, I set my box beside me on the bench and let the autumn chill wrap around my shoulders. Leaves drifted lazily down, crunching under hurried shoes of professionals passing by with paper cups and briefcases. For once, I wasn't rushing anywhere. My silence had its own current, and I wanted to see where it would flow. Hours later, my phone lit up with messages from Sterling Dynamics senior partners. "If you are not reinstated, our contracts are on hold." Shortly after, Horizon Pharma echoed the same threat. Then Caldera Energy joined, their CEO's voice sharp with fury in a voicemail I didn't return. I imagined the scene unfolding at the 35th floor. Victor's assistant reporting trembling numbers, shareholders calling, demanding explanations for millions at risk. Panic would creep along the mahogany table where only arrogance had sat this morning. Victor would roar about control, but control had already slipped through his hands quietly, invisibly, into mine. I sipped my coffee, watching the swirl of steam rise and vanish. My silence said more than any statement ever could. I didn't need to defend myself. The city was doing it for me. Each unanswered call, each ignored email, only sharpened the edge. The less I spoke, the louder the loyalty of my clients became. Somewhere above the skyline, Victor was scrambling to stitch together a narrative. I remained on a park bench, steady as stone, waiting for the next tremor to arrive. When it came, it arrived not as a call, but as a countdown 45 minutes after I had walked out. The first contract threatened to collapse, and I felt the city hold its breath. 45 minutes after I walked out of Hallberg Corp., the real storm began. My phone buzzed in steady waves on the cafe table, screen lighting with numbers I knew belonged to the boardroom. I let it vibrate against the wood, untouched. Each unanswered ring was more valuable than words. Sterling Dynamics came first. Their chairman's message was blunt. No Isabel, no deal. Horizon Pharma followed within minutes, their legal team drafting suspension notices. By the time Caldera Energy's CEO left a voicemail dripping with anger, 3 of the company's lifelines were already fraying. I stirred the last of my coffee, the spoon clinking softly, a rhythm more powerful than the shouting I imagined rattling Victor's office walls. Silence had become my sharpest instrument. Every minute I withheld my voice added another layer of pressure, another crack to the foundation he thought was unshakable. Somewhere above me, in the steel towers of Midtown, Victor must have been pacing. I could picture him, jaw clenched, voice rising. She's replaceable. Yet the market whispered otherwise. Clients weren't calling for Halberg Corp. They were calling for me. The irony wasn't lost on me for years. Victor had dismissed the work of relationships, insisting that numbers alone drove business. But the contracts he flaunted were never his. They were built on handshakes, late-night calls, and trust I had earned one conversation at a time. I ignored the third, the fourth, the fifth call, each leaving more frantic messages than the last. The board would be scrambling, voices overlapping, arguments slicing across that polished mahogany table. Shareholders would be pressing, wondering how a single woman outside their glass fortress could hold more power than the CEO inside it. I paid my bill and rose from the cafe seat, slipping the phone back into my bag, its buzz still constant against the leather. The city outside was loud with horns and footsteps, but all I heard was the slow crumble of a man's empire, timed down to the very minute. And the countdown had only just begun. That evening, I set the cardboard box of memories aside and turned to the safe bolted into my bedroom wall. My hands hesitated only a second before spinning the dial. The door swung open with a metallic sigh, revealing the binder I had guarded for years. Its spine read, Renewal Clauses, 2010, 2023. Page after page carried my signature alongside the names of our most valuable clients. I had insisted from the beginning that certain addendums bore my direct authorization. At the time, it seemed a way to protect both sides from bureaucratic errors. Now I understood it for what it was: insurance. Without me, those clauses had no legal weight. If clients wanted continuity, they needed Isabel Moreno, not Halberg Corp. I placed the binder on the table and dialed Elena. She answered on the first ring. What you gave me proves theft, I said. What I hold proves dependency. He can't function without me. There was a pause on her end, the sound of papers rustling. Then her voice dropped lower. There's more. Isabel. I left because I saw too much. Halberg's been diverting funds into a shadow account overseas. Cayman Islands. Maybe I caught fragments transactions that didn't belong, but I couldn't gather enough before he cut my access. I tightened my grip on the phone. You have records, partial ones, she admitted. Enough to raise suspicion, not enough to bury him. But with your leverage, with clients demanding you, we could force an audit. That would expose everything. I looked at the binder spread before me, the inked signatures that tied his empire to my name, proof of theft, proof of dependency, and now a glimpse of fraud. Victor wasn't just a thief of ideas, he was bleeding the company dry behind closed doors. Elena, I said slowly, I think we've just found the fracture line. The city outside pulsed with lights, but my gaze stayed on the binder. In those pages lay not only my protection, but the first crack in Victor Halberg's carefully constructed mask. and I was ready to press. The chandelier light at the Waldorf Towers glinted off crystal glasses, but no amount of polish could disguise the tension hanging in the air. I sat near the back of the ballroom where the emergency shareholder meeting had been called, binder tucked safely in my bag. Victor stood at the front, pacing like a general rallying troops. "She is irrelevant," he declared, voice raised enough to fill the hall. "This company's future does not depend on one woman. We built this empire together, and we will move forward without her." He had rehearsed the speech well, his tone a mixture of authority and scorn, but the faces staring back at him weren't convinced. Screens around the room flickered to life as clients joined via video conference. The CEO of Sterling Dynamics appeared first, his expression icy. "Victor, we've been clear. No Isabel, no contract." Horizon Pharma followed, their spokesperson echoing the sentiment. Caldera Energy left no ambiguity. "We will suspend all operations until she is reinstated." The ripple spread fast. Shareholders shifted uneasily, whispering in clusters. Victor's jaw tightened, but he doubled down. "This is temporary. Clients will adapt. They always do." That was my cue. I stood, calm and deliberate, and set my phone on the table, pressing play. His voice filled the ballroom, unfiltered and unmistakable. "After 15 years, you're done. Pack your desk." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. On screen, clients froze around me. The whispers turned into audible gasps. The arrogance that had once made him look decisive now revealed itself as cruelty. One shareholder muttered loud enough for all to hear, "This is how you treat the person who carried our accounts." Victor's mask cracked visibly. His smirk faltered, his posture stiffened. For years, he had worn arrogance like armor. Tonight, it became the blade cutting him open. I picked up my phone, slipping it back into my bag. I didn't need to add commentary. His own words had spoken louder than I ever could, and I knew, beneath the murmurs now rising, there were truths far darker, still waiting to surface. Granite and Lane's office sat high above Park Avenue, all glass and steel, the opposite of the mahogany fortress I had left behind. Their senior partner greeted me not with suspicion, but with a handshake firm enough to feel like respect. Over a quiet table, the offer was laid out as senior partnership, freedom to shape strategy, and the resources to carry the clients who had already pledged themselves to me. I didn't hesitate. Sterling Dynamics signed first, their executives sending over transition papers within hours. By the next morning, Horizon Pharma followed suit, then Caldera Energy. The dominoes Victor thought he controlled were tumbling into my hands. News outlets picked up the story before lunch. Key clients flee Halberg Corp. Cite loyalty to former director. My phone buzzed endlessly with requests for comment, but I gave none. Silence remained my sharpest reply. At Halberg Corp, silence wasn't an option. Reports leaked of shouting matches in Victor's office, of staff resignations piling at HR's door. Shareholders who had once applauded his rise now filled inboxes with demands for answers. Then came the auditors. A team from Manhattan's Financial Crimes Division walked into headquarters unannounced, briefcases in hand, badges flashing. Word spread fast someone had tipped them about offshore accounts, about irregular transfers that could no longer be buried under quarterly reports. I sat in a cafe across the street from my new office, binder at my side, watching the news scroll across screens above the barista's counter. Halberg Corp under investigation. The headline was clinical, but I knew what it meant. His empire had cracked wide enough for the city to peer inside. I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against porcelain. Victor's mask had fractured in public. What began as whispers of loyalty had become headlines of betrayal, and beneath those headlines, the deeper rot was about to be dragged into the light. The auditors moved quickly. Within days, their findings spread through every corner of Hallberg Korf. Millions had been siphoned into shell companies overseas, masked beneath layers of forged invoices and phantom vendors. The boardroom, once his stage, turned into a courtroom. I heard from contacts inside that shareholders erupted the moment the report was read. Shouts of betrayal, demands for resignation, accusations fired like bullets across the table. Victor, pale but defiant, pointed his finger outward. She orchestrated this, he insisted, dragging my name into the storm. But the storm no longer answered to him. Elena stepped forward, calm and unflinching, with the documents she had guarded. Her voice carried across the hall as she detailed the transactions, the falsified approvals, the secret accounts. Every line led back to Victor. My name never appeared once. The board voted without hesitation. Security entered the room, their presence enough to silence even his sputtering denials. Cameras waited outside as they walked him through the glass doors he had once strutted through. Employees lined the hallways, their stunned silence more damning than any headline. That same morning, I sat at a small cafe table on Park Avenue, the same kind of table where weeks earlier I had gathered the ashes of a career. Now a contract from Granite and Lane rested before me, its ink drying under my signature. A senior partnership, authority, and most of all, the respect Victor had tried to strip away. I looked out the window, where the city pulsed with its endless rhythm, and felt no triumph in his fall, only clarity. He had fired me with arrogance. I had answered with patience. In the end, the truth had done the rest. The pen slipped from my fingers as I closed the folder. One chapter had ended, but the words still echoed inside me, waiting for the moment when I would finally speak them aloud. Months passed, and the skyline of Manhattan became the backdrop to my new life. From the corner office at Granite and Lane, I could see the very towers where I had once been dismissed like a disposable file. The air here felt different, lighter, not because the work was easier, but because the weight was finally mine to carry on my terms. On the wall behind my desk hung a single photograph of my daughter at her college graduation. I remembered the sting of missing her earlier milestones, birthdays, recitals, even the long evenings when she asked if I would ever be home for dinner. Those memories had haunted me in the silence of boardrooms. Now they reminded me of why I had endured, why I had chosen not to crumble when Victor Hallberg tried to erase me. I often thought of those 15 years, the nights spent in glass towers while my life blurred past, the sacrifices folded neatly into contracts I never owned. They had called me replaceable. They believed my absence would barely ripple. Yet today, the empire that dismissed me was rubble, and the empire I carried forward was thriving. At a leadership conference downtown, a young woman approached me nervously after my panel. "How did you survive it?" she asked, her eyes wide, as if my answer might hold a map for her own struggles. I smiled, steady. By knowing silence isn't weakness, it's timing. The room quieted, pens stilled. They leaned in, waiting for more. But I gave them only the truth that mattered. He fired me without warning. I said, each word deliberate. I fired him with proof. The line hung in the air, heavier than applause, sharper than any revenge I could have spoken in anger. For the first time in years, I felt complete not because I had destroyed him, but because I had reclaimed myself. And as the lights of the city flickered on outside the windows, I knew the story was no longer about his fall, but about the crown silence had placed on my head.